One of the most interesting artists I've ever done a video on. Let's talk about it. Hi guys, welcome to the channel. If you like hearing stories from the 90s, subscribe. Let's get into it. Grammy Award winner Terence Trent D'Arby rose to fame in the late 80s and early 90s. The pretty face artist surprisingly pursued a career in boxing before becoming a singer. Born in Manhattan in 1962, he was originally called Terence Trent Howard. He was raised by his mother Frances, who was a school teacher and counsellor, and his stepfather, James Benjamin D'Arby, who was a minister. Terence took his stepfather's last name and added the apostrophe. He started singing from an early age. With his stepfather being a minister, he was used to singing in church, and people used to compliment him on his voice all the time. Singing in church was the start of his passion, and at an early age he realised that he could touch people with his voice.
So I remember singing in this church service, and it's immediately after I finished singing, this real big older woman, maybe like a grandmother, she just came and gave me this really big hug, and she gave me a quarter, which at that time was like a lot of money if you were a little kid. You know, so I was able to go and buy candy. And I thought, if you get this type of attention and this type of money to spend on candy, I think I want to do music.
When he was young, his family did move around. They eventually settled in Dillon, Florida. Years later, at the start of his music career, Terence would make a home for himself in Europe, mainly residing in the UK, but also spending time in Germany and France. He would later go on to make some controversial comments about life in the US and about US artists such as Prince and Michael Jackson. He became known for such comments, to the point where it sometimes overshadowed his music. Terence attended Dillon High School and was a member of the Moderneers singing group. And he was a finalist in the school's talent contest, which sought to find the most talented boy in the school. But when he was in high school, he was bullied relentlessly by both boys and girls.
And but there was this one time when I was in the 7th grade, and there was this girl named Ainsley. It was a white girl, and she asked if I would come into her karate class because she felt I needed it. And I remember once, I was in there for a month and we had to spar. And she kicked my butt pretty bad. And, when that got back to the school, it took me a couple of years to live that down, because, I mean, it's one thing, you growing up, black and a black girl kicks your butt. If a white girl kicks your butt, that's... So it took me a while to live that one down.
Another hobby he pursued while he was in high school, and probably in an attempt to fight off the bullies, was boxing. He realised he had a talent for boxing while he was sparring with his cousin. He was quite a good fighter. He took boxing very seriously, and he eventually found a coach. He started training at the Church Street Gym, and his coach was Jimmy Williams, a former sparring partner for Sugar Ray Leonard. He grew up in the era of Sugar Ray Leonard and Muhammad Ali, and of course they were a huge inspiration to him. He said he met Muhammad Ali a couple of times, and even had the honour of having his sweat splashed on him on occasion. Apparently Sugar Ray was a dancer, and that's where he got his moves from while in the boxing ring. Terence ended up entering the Golden Gloves Championships. This is a competition for amateur boxers that's held across the US. He entered the Miami competition and won. As well as being a good boxer, he was also pretty bright. He studied journalism at the University of Central Florida. In his freshman year, he was approached by some army recruiters. They told him if he joined the army, he could continue to pursue boxing and have access to the best trainers and even become a star in his unit. So he joined the army in 1980, believing it to be a good opportunity to continue his boxing and travel. But obviously when he got there, he soon realised that he was going to have to do some serious training and one day put his life on the line. They expected him to undergo training to become a paratrooper, which is something that he really didn't want to do. So they decided to make him a supply clerk, and they stationed him in Germany. He actually ended up going to the same base where Elvis was once stationed. More than likely, this is where he developed a love for Europe and travelling. He became very active on the social scene while he was in the army, And apparently every weekend they would go to Frankfurt and paint the town red, so to speak. One weekend he went into town looking for a bass guitar, and that's where he saw an advertisement of a group looking for a lead singer. When he contacted them, they said they were looking for a singer who could also play guitar, and he lied and said that he could play guitar. He went to the audition and he said it was at an old World War II bunker, which had been converted into a building for rehearsing. But he said there were some racially charged writings on the wall, and he wondered what he was getting himself into. He had to come clean and admit that he didn't play guitar, so they said, well, you better be one hell of a singer. He ended up getting into the band called Touch, and he became their lead singer. They toured all over the country, and this group were jamming. At this point, army life became less and less appealing to him. As the band gained more success, he soon realised that it was music that would take him places. He found being a supply clerk boring in comparison. He admitted that he basically absconded and ended up abandoning his military duties, choosing to go on tour with the band instead. And he was still boxing at this time. He had a coach, he trained regularly and entered into competitions, but his coach saw that his passion for the sport was waning. He ended up getting knocked out in the second round of a crucial fight. His coach turned around and told him that if he didn't want to be there, he could leave. But he didn't just leave boxing, he left the army, which is a huge no-no. He apparently disappeared for 3 weeks and was actually touring with his band. He ended up getting court-martialed. Speaking of going AWOL from the army, he said, "I was in hiding. It was really romantic. Fugitive on the run. Serious rock and roll myth. Every gig, I wondered, would they catch me? Would this be my last gig for years?" He signed with the management company Klaus Dieter Schleenitz, which was huge for his music career, but he had to face the music in more ways than one. When he was court-martialed, he was facing 5 years in prison, but he had a really good lawyer from New York, and luckily that's what saved him. He was dishonorably discharged in 1983 at the age of 21. So after leaving the army, or getting kicked out, he returned briefly to the US to officially leave, and then he went back to Europe. He stayed in his band for another 3 years, but then they eventually broke up. He said, "There was a lot of jealousy in the band. I was the front man, and to be honest, just wanted to be a star. I wanted a fast car and fast women. I just wanted to shake my butt on stage and get laid." He basically hung out and partied around Europe for a year, then eventually settled in London, and he continued his music career as a solo artist. Terence Trent D'Arby released his first album in the UK in 1987. It went straight to #1. This was partly due to a very clever PR strategy while promoting the album. During this time, he made some very controversial statements, to the point where fans couldn't believe what came out of his mouth at times. Speaking of his debut album before its release, he told People magazine, "I can justifiably say that my first album would be one of the most brilliant debuts from any artist in the last 10 years. Then he modestly declared, "My album is better than Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band," which according to Rolling Stone was the best album in over 20 years, from 1967 to 1987. So he was basically saying that his album was going to be better than the Beatles, which would be a huge thing to say now, let alone back then. Even before his album was released, Terence Trent D'Arby became a star in the UK. Fans were drawn to his personality, confidence, and outlandish statements. He even made some backhanded statements about his home country of America, claiming or hinting to leaving because of racism and other types of discrimination, violence, and being uncomfortable with the culture. Then he made some controversial statements about his fellow artists such as Prince and Michael Jackson. Many saw him as a British version of the two, even though he was American. He implied that the industry had emasculated them, and that if you wanted success in the industry as a young black man, you had to be willing to be emasculated.
I pulled this quote because I thought it was interesting to talk about. A lot of people say this, but they never say it publicly. And the quote was, "Any black male act appearing in America has to emasculate himself. Prince has to pretend to be bisexual. Michael Jackson has to pretend to be asexual." Would you go into this?
Well, first of all, I said that about 7 years ago. And I will discuss that. But one of the things to bear in mind is that I think the beauty of getting older, I'm 31 now, is when you're like 25, you think you know everything. And in fact, you know nothing when you're that different from what the norm says you're supposed to be. But I think if you look at them, if you look at, Prince, Michael Jackson, and the ones that have achieved that level, they've either been kind of more amorphous, or they've been someone like Lionel Richie, who I think you would see. I think people have a certain feeling for Lionel more as a family member.
Later, he was seen to backtrack on these statements, implying that it was just a way to drum up publicity for his album and that it essentially worked.
What I find most interesting is that people took all that seriously, especially, in England, where every 6 months there's a new pop performer who comes and says things like that. I didn't mean most of the things that I said.
Every 6 weeks.
Rolling Stone said, D'Arby is the hottest and smartest luminary that the trend-fixated British pop scene has witnessed all decade. A magnificent and rousing vocalist who could combine the sensual graininess of Sam Cooke and Otis Redding with the tonal dexterity of Marvin Gaye, Al Green and Smokey Robinson. Writer Charles Shear Murray said, D'Arby seems like something invented by 3 rock critics on the phone. Young, black American, pretty, highly articulate, enormously well-read, and gifted with an awesome knack for self-promotion. Perfect. He won a Grammy for the album for Best Male Vocal Performance, and of course various Brit Awards, such as the International Breakthrough Act. His sophomore album, Neither Fish Nor Flesh, got mixed reviews and didn't chart as well. He seemed to have returned with more humility, and again, he backtracked on a lot of his previous statements. He even said that he didn't really mean a lot of what he said, it was just a strategy. Writer Tom Moon said, although some fans of D'Arby's first album may be put off by the density of Neither Fish Nor Flesh, there was enough music on it to guarantee that this artist will be around for a while. That's good news, because whether you like him or not, D'Arby has shown here that he's unafraid to learn. A better sign of a healthy ego than those comparisons to the Beatles he used to make. The album was described as a mixture of psychedelic pop, rock, R&B and funk. Even last year, on the podcast Electronically Yours, he said that the album was well ahead of its time. So the album didn't chart as well, reaching 12 in the UK album charts and 61 on the American Billboard charts.
What happened with the last one?
Basically, I think it was too different from what people were expecting me to follow up the hard line with. And you have a choice, I guess, if you're truly aspiring to be a true artist, which I have been from the beginning. You can either go down the safe path, or you can always try to follow your instincts and your heart.
He went through a difficult period within the music industry, and it appears that he had some issues with his record company, Sony. After this, he took some time out and moved back to LA. He was absent from the industry for about 4 years. His third album, though, revitalized his career. It reached 4 in the UK and had songs such as Delicate, a collaboration with Des'ree. In his interview on the podcast last year, speaking of Prince, he said that he always longed for a big brother, little brother relationship with him, but it never quite materialized at first. He said because his biological father abandoned him when he was a kid, he developed trust issues when it came to other men. He was never a guy's guy, he always gravitated more towards women. But he said he and Prince had a, quote, telepathic relationship and a strong, emphatic vibe. And he was absolutely devastated when he passed away. Speaking of Michael Jackson, he said Michael had an astute business mind and he used to observe as he made business moves, hoping to learn from him. He said he and Prince did eventually develop that big brother, little brother relationship. He said he was supportive, gracious, and generous. In 2001, similar to Prince at one point, Terence Trent D'Arby changed his name legally. He officially changed his name to Sananda Maitreya and drastically declared that Terence Trent D'Arby was no longer with us. He released the album Wildcard under the name Sananda Maitreya, along with Terence Trent D'Arby. But then it was re-released the following year with no more Terence Trent D'Arby, just under the name Sananda. It's believed he adopted the name during his time out from music. Producer Martin Ware, who interviewed him for the Electronically Yours podcast, said that he wasn't allowed to say his previous name during the interview at all. Now, I've been calling him Terence because
his mama named him Clay. I'ma call him Clay.
No, but seriously, that's the only name I've known him by. But to be fair, it's been since 2001, so it's been a couple of decades. These days, Sananda prefers to release music via his website. He has released a number of albums, toured Europe and Australia. He filled in for his friend, the late Michael Hutchence, the lead singer of INXS. He had a history of drug abuse and sadly took his own life in '97. As well as Prince, Terence is also named British rock legend Rod Stewart as another huge inspiration to him. He seems to have a very diverse taste in music, and he believes that today's pop music originally derived from African and Irish music. In terms of his heritage, he believes that he is predominantly Native American, as well as West Indian and European. He hasn't officially done a DNA test, but that's what he believes based on what he's studied. Today, his main focus is family. He's a husband and a proud father of 2 sons. He said being a father and having your sons look up to you is one of life's greatest achievements. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts below, you know I read the comments. Like and subscribe for weekly videos. And don't forget to click the bell for more.